Hello and welcome to what I believe is the fifth installment of our 10 Talk series. Today we're going to be testing something new. We're going to have a guest. We do have a guest. Joining us today is Rob Fuller. Rob is a 20-year, sorry, Rob said it, veteran in the technology space, has held multiple senior roles across the industry, including managing director at Hart Hanks. He co-founded a MarTech company in the B2B space called 8 Point Arc, and played very senior role as the managing director of customer data orchestration at Accenture. So has a lot of exposure to a lot of very large brands, a lot of very large tech groups, and is going to share some of his wisdom with us today. So we're excited. Welcome, Rob.
Thank you very much, and congrats! 5th episode already. That's an accomplishment. You're sticking with it. That's great.
That's right. No, we've actually gotten feedback, and this is a good thing. Feedback from lots of people saying that they like it and they want to continue with it. So we're going to continue as long as people like it, which is great. And Rob, we're excited to have you today. I think the technology world is not a new concept, right? We've been talking about technology for 40 years, right? What's next and what's the next best technology? But we thought it'd be extremely valuable to have you on today to really look at this ecosystem that we're in and wholly demystify some of the craziness going on with technology platforms, but also help us understand what's best in class. How do we really operationalize this? What do we need to do next to make a tech ecosystem successful? So that's our topic today, and we really want to see if we can solve it all in 10 minutes, which is always exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and start the clock here. And
all right, I'm going to go with the first question. So Rob, what is happening at a macro level in the tech ecosystem, and why do you think that it's happening?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's going on, but like your big ideas that are still pervasive are the move to the cloud. And in some ways, MarTech and has been ahead on that with the adoption of software as a service and moving away from more traditional on-premise IT. And of course, edge is a big deal of like, how can we push performance closer to users and make decisions kind of abstractly closer to where they need to be made and bringing them back more centrally. And then of course, big pushes around data privacy, right? And so as we think about those things, there's an abundance of capabilities that are springing up around startups and established best of stack solutions, kind of adding functionality there. But those are the big drivers, right? Of how do we get out of the business of managing resources that maybe we're not so good at to focus on our business, but yet still get all the benefit of technology to kind of propel us forward and automate and help us make decisions, and really on the marketing and side, treat people as individuals and recognize them and understand what they're looking for in the moment without it necessarily requiring a lot of human intervention.
Yeah, I like that term edge, kind of like the edge computing, edge operations. It's that centralization, decentralization debate. It's the whole kind of democratization of the business process. So it's an exciting one, and it's a cool term as well. So
it is. It always has that edge to it, right?
Yeah.
It's that pendulum, right? Of if we go too far to centralization, we get benefits to singularity on that, but then we lose that flexibility, we lose performance, we have moved slower, and so we need to strike that balance. And so I think as edge computing and different edge mechanisms and thinking of edge operations of trying to get the best of both worlds is what we're really questing after there.
And that makes sense. And actually on that topic of getting the best of both worlds from centralization and edge, what about just the technology as a whole? Like there's a lot of options out there, right? And so how do we think about maybe, like you mentioned before, like what's the best stack, but also then what's the best breed to have that centralization and the edge or whatever's best for the organization? How do we think about that?
Yeah, when I did my MarTech startup, I was so excited when we got listed by Chief MarTech on that list, and then it came out that there was 5,000 other players on the list the year that we got listed, and 8,000 the next year. So there's a lot. So you got to recognize what kind of company are you, right? Are you best of stack or best of breed? Yeah, and that's kind of a fundamental built-in organizational thing. And some are buy versus build, but again, if we're assuming buy, we need to think along those lines. And then either way, you're going to have some mix of technologies coming into play. And a lot of the times, companies have been pretty mono-focused on the problem at hand, and whether they are best of stack and then just augmenting, or if they're truly best of breed and integrating, they don't think strategically about integration. And that's the one piece I think we can actually predict, is that we're going to need to continually to integrate new systems. We know our channels and we know our customers, right? And so if we have those things as our cornerstones to stand on, then adding additional channels, adding additional decisioning engines, adding different revenue enablement pieces start to become easier, because we should be screwing them into our infrastructure in a more nimble way, right? And so if we plan for that integration, which it may mean a little bit of upfront cost, we can become a lot more agile in how we're thinking about those technologies. But yeah, fundamentally, addressing what kind of organization are you? Best of stack. We want one throat to choke, one vendor, one set of vendors, ideally maybe even aligned. I think the Microsoft, Adobe, SAP type of alliance, is that important to us? Or do we truly think the best approach is not to be too tightly integrated with those, and to have that more flexibility across the best of breed providers to always be getting it? And there's pros and cons to both, and you have to be managing to those pros and cons on both sides.
Yeah, I think that's interesting, because there's so much I hear about, operations roles, operations leaders, whether they're IT operations, sales operations, marketing operations. There's a constant theme of frustration around, my end customer brought this new shiny object to the table because it does this one thing really well. And now I've got to try and figure out how to use this thing. Now I've got to try and figure out how to integrate it. I mean, but it's the reality of the world today. And kind of, I'm of the opinion, well, let's just kind of absorb that. Let's kind of like take it on board and say that's just life at this point, with so many tech options and so many kind of best of breed things out there. Like, how would you recommend they kind of think about that? Like, and kind of maybe have a little bit of zen and just like live with it in a nice way.
Yeah. I've seen clients actually have their IT organization try to say no to a free trial or proof of concept that a vendor wants to implement and support, because they don't have the resources to support the integration. That it's so costly on their internal side to integrate a new application that they can't even do it for free when the vendor is providing it for free. Obviously, that's not good for advancing the business, right? Like, if we're aligned to our organizational goal, it's how are we going to sell more? How are we going to support our customers better? How are we reducing our costs? And if free is still too much of a barrier to move forward, then we're doing something wrong. So yeah, I think plan for that, right? How are we going to say yes? Do we have a structured process? How are we going to know what we're going to take on? How do we know when we shut it off, right? Because again, maybe it's not free, but or when is it going to be free until? How do we decide what that value is going to be? But we got to take the friction of onboarding off, right? And so this is where the software platforms can kind of catch us, right? Where we fall into the trap of using point-to-point integrations across the different platforms. So Salesforce is talking to Adobe, which is talking to Optimizely, which is then talking to Segment, whatever that cycle is. And if all of those points are talking to each other, we have that n number of integrations problem. And that's where every integration is then custom. We don't have a way to manage through that. We don't have the right set of controls. We're at risk from what data goes where. And that's where I agree with IT that it can be too costly and too challenging. So that's that idea of, let's just assume we're going to keep getting new technologies coming in, and we should be proving whether they work or not, and push it back on the business to say, what is the criteria of success? But we need to be able to onboard new platforms and experiment with them. But again, we know where those experimentations can occur. They can occur in channel, and they're going to need our customer data. And what we want out of them is getting that response data out and into our analytics environment, right? So I can predict our different touch points with these platforms pretty well. Now, the exact details of integration, we make it available on a REST API and a flat file, and we have a data to fabric connection solution. If the vendor doesn't support that, maybe that's not a good vendor for us, right? So that could be a good argument. Certainly, we can do this free proof of concept trial, but they need to support one of these standards, and we can only customize so much in our current stack. That's a good reason to say this is a best of breed for us, or best of stack answer to augment our capabilities for us or not. It doesn't fit our ecosystem. Yeah. But that should be a pretty flexible answer overall.
Interesting. And do you feel like it's a both a predictability, right? You said, I love what you said, which is already predict that you're going to do lots of integrations. Just know that, right? Set up your organization in a way that will have integrations in the future, today and tomorrow. And I love that. I think that's a perfect way to set that up. Do you think it's also a resource thing? Like, do we need to predict additional resources for the integration, or is it just good enough to say, hey, we know we're going to do this?
Someone's got to do the work, right? So I think you can approach that on the organizational level of like, go back to the business and say, how many experiments in this way do you want to do per year, and how much should we plan for? But I also think you need an answer when they didn't think of it that way, or they weren't able to forward think and plan or budget that. But now they have the justification of what's it going to cost. So again, I'd say you plan up front to create these integration points so that the incremental cost per integration is really low, right? So I think of a decoupled architecture. We support a few different mechanisms of integration. So example, they need the list of customers. Simple example, right? You have to push that list into many platforms. Well, the act of pushing it or reformatting it obviously would be custom per client, but why isn't it available on a data lake that we can just, through an admin task, grant access to an application to? And now it's up for debate who should do the work of actually getting that list into that platform. And that's a more flexible skill set. You want to bring down the technology sophistication of the incremental work.
That's interesting.
We could do another like 20 minutes on this topic, I think. I think we need to do like a couple of deep dives into a few areas.
Yeah. I mean, that's big. I think organizations need to know that, though, right? I mean, I think that's the biggest issue, is planning for that. Right? If we can assume it and predict it, then we plan.
But I worry is that they don't even realize there is a choice.
Yeah.
If they're constantly hearing no and not thinking that there is a choice going forward that they could plan for.
All right.
That's a good point.
Well, thanks so much, Rob. That was great. Hopefully it gives some people some things to think about in terms of preparing for this continual world of multiple best of breed solutions and tech stacks. We appreciate your time today.
Yes.
And I think that's it for this session. So
10 minutes goes fast.
Yeah, yes. It goes fast.
Thank you.
It does. It went really fast. Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.
Cheers, guys.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.